It appears the U.S. does not need to hide its intentions behind the war in Ukraine. Military sales, for example, are one major incentive for the U.S. The U.S. President Joe Biden has praised Lockheed Martin for making Javelin missiles in a visit to the plant that produces them. The U.S. push behind applauding military manufacturers of keeping up with weapons orders for Ukraine comes as casualties are mounting in Ukraine, economies are unraveling, and the world is edging closer to World War III. Let me first introduce our guest for this edition of the Spotlight. Joining us is Arnold August, an author and journalist from Montreal. Also joining us is Daniel Lazare, who's a journalist and author who joins us from New York. Okay, welcome to you both. Arnold August, I'll start with you. The U.S. President Joe Biden on Tuesday visited this Lockheed Martin company. The ticker symbol is LMT.N. Just so we can relate that to the topic of our program. It manufactures the anti-tank Javelin missile, and filming that took place there, he was applauding the factory workers and the company for keeping up with the orders there. Now, this is kind of reminiscent of what Trump was doing, if you remember, in that scene in the White House, I forget which room, with Mohammed bin Salman, with the placards saying thank you and the orders and, you know, all that show that he put on there, which made lots of money for the U.S. What does that show to you when you have the U.S. president visiting this plant and applauding the plant workers and the company itself?
Well, I think the first thing is that the United States has apparently put aside any pretense that the war in Ukraine against Russia is for anything like for democracy or whatever, and they cannot even hide the fact that those who are calling the shots are the weapons manufacturers. For example, Austin's Secretary of Defense Austin at one point joined the main partner of Lockheed, which is Raytheon, who together are producing this very dangerous missile. Now, when you go on to, one goes on to their website of this company that Biden visited yesterday, they sell these javelins like Americans may say sell ice cream. We have the best ice cream. We have the best hot dogs. It's so cynical. Allow me to share with you and the listeners just a couple of sentences from that company selling their product. The world's premier shoulder fired anti-armor system Javelin takes the fight to the enemy. Javelin automatically guides itself to the target after launch, allowing the gunner to take cover and avoid counterfire. Soldiers or Marines can reposition themselves immediately after firing or reload to engage another threat. Using an arch-top attack profile, Javelin climbs above its target for improved visibility and then strikes where the armor is weakened. I mean, you know, it's a very dangerous weapon, and it could cause a lot of harm to the Russian forces and contribute substantially to increase the conflict and bringing the forces even farther away from any negotiated settlement. In any case, they don't seem to be interested at all in negotiating a negotiated settlement.
No, not at all. And Daniel Lazare, as a matter of fact, it is said that Biden is using this visit to press Congress to approve what he is now proposing, which is just $33 billion for assisting Ukraine militarily, including more than the $20 billion in military aid. So far, $4 billion or more to have been allocated to Ukraine. I mean, when you take a step back at the way that this is coming consecutively in the past, I think 2 to 3 weeks max, what do you think, Daniel Lazare? What is the U.S. doing here?
Well, there's no doubt that a lot of arms manufacturers are making a lot of money off these weapons. They are having a wonderful time as they rake in the profits and work overtime to turn these weapons out. Um, but there's something interesting going on here because the U.S. is actually having trouble making up for all the weapons that the Ukrainians are running through on the battlefield. So they apparently are firing these missiles like mad. It's not clear how many, what effect they're having, and reports from the battlefield are actually somewhat mixed concerning their effectiveness. But the U.S. is pulling out all stops. It's revving up its factory lines. It is putting money in the hands of arms makers and urging them to do everything they can to keep these weapons flowing. But it shows that the U.S. Is determined to win this war. It is not at all interested in a negotiated settlement. It wants to win. It wants to drive Russia out of the Ukraine and probably out of the Crimean Peninsula and the Donbass republics as well. So the U.S. is striving for a maximum victory here, and that will essentially wreak an enormous price in terms of economic damage and the loss of human life.
Yeah, maybe we briefly, if you can elaborate a little bit more as to what you think the reasons are when you said, Daniel Lazare, that they're running out of supplies, that they can't keep up with the amounts that need to be, I guess, given to Ukraine. Are they running out of supplies based on the fact that what they're providing, which is so much, is not working against Russia, that Russia is putting up a good front? Is that what you mean, Daniel Lazare, or what's really happening?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reviews from the battlefield are actually kind of mixed as to how effective these weapons are, and the Western press, just sings the praises of the Ukrainian military, saying that it's winning one battle after the other, but in fact, in the same breath, it points out that the Russians are pressing a 300-mile wide offensive against the Ukrainians, and that takes a lot of firepower. So apparently the Ukrainians are having a good deal of trouble in coping with that offensive. And they're running through munitions like crazy, and the U.S. is doing everything it can to supply them with the weapons they need. But it's clear the war is not going quite as smoothly as the Western media says it is, and that the Russian steamroller is forging ahead.
Arnold August, thank you so much for the information that you gave to us about the way that these Javelin works. Now, when Biden actually came out and said this fight is not going to be cheap, and that they are working hard to become the biggest producer of semiconductor chips that are needed for these Javelin missiles. And many other high technology goods. Now, I'm curious as to whether he's using the fact that the U.S. is running low on semiconductor chips, that war is good, so therefore we need equipment, so therefore we need to produce these chips. Is that what he's saying? I mean, he could maybe use another product. I'm sure it's not just machine guns or Javelin or whatever military equipment that use semiconductor chips.
No, I think that is the implication with regards to Biden's statement. So, of course, this opens up another sector of the American economy, in addition to the open arms production, and that is the Silicon Valley type of activity with these chips. And I think it's just to substantiate what was said previously, that another indication that the United States is far from strong and far from actually winning the war is while Biden was making this announcement for increased Javelin production and shipments to Ukraine, you have another important actor, Israel, openly saying yesterday that they are going to increase their military help to the Zelensky government, as well as for arms and even soldiers. Now, for the United States to get involved openly with Israel in this conflict, that means I think they're dangerous because they are taking a chance. What can this thing could recoup, have effect in the Middle East as well, where Iran has made it very clear that they will not accept Israeli aggression. They will not accept, and also Russia has said that has said to Israel, you better stay out of Ukraine. But this is dangerous for the United States. I think the United States is desperate, so they have to pull that last-ditch effort to try to get Israel involved, and that could also have important repercussions amongst other countries in the West who probably would not like to see Israel involved in Ukraine, because Israel is known as an apartheid state, as a fascist state. So by their participation in this war alongside the Zelensky government, it confirms what the Russians are saying, that it is that the Zelensky government is a fascist government that aligns with anyone to oppose Russia. And we should not forget as well the former head of the CIA and the former Secretary of Defense, Panetta. He openly said in a TV interview with the liberal CNN that our goal, American goal, is to kill as many Russians as possible. That's not me saying it. That he is saying it. So this thing is bound to accelerate, and it's obvious that the United States are not interested in negotiated settlement. They are only interested in weakening Russia and trying to defeat Russia. But I think their goal, they will be very disappointed in the coming weeks and months.
Sure. Well, just to add to what you said, Daniel Lazare, is the fact that the U.S. actually has provided Ukraine with 10 of these anti-tank missiles per each tank. So 10 times the amount to make sure that it gets rid of Russian tanks. Now, what's interesting over here when you take a look at just the military aspect of this, Daniel Lazare, is the meeting that was held in Germany just days ago, I believe, where it was by invitation of the U.S., where 40 countries were invited. And basically this was, again, trying to get a pledge from these countries to assist Ukraine militarily. And what's interesting about this is the fact that, correct me if I'm wrong, Daniel Lazare, doesn't the U.S. actually provide most NATO countries with their military equipment? And therefore, it's asking them to either help out or purchase new ones. And before I ask you for your reaction, this is what the Lockheed Raytheon spokesperson, which is this joint venture between the two for the Javelin, said. We are exploring options to more quickly replenish U.S. inventories and backfill depleted stocks of allies and partners. So it kind of points to the fact that the U.S. wins no matter what here.
Yeah, I mean, the U.S. is going to the U.S. arms manufacturers are making a lot of money, and the U.S. dominance in terms of weaponry will be more and more established as a consequence of this war. But I just wouldn't reduce it to a simple question of profits. I mean, what's important is empire, and essentially, Biden can't afford to lose this war, because if he loses this war, essentially it'll be the Afghan debacle multiplied by 100. The U.S. will be so profoundly shaken that the American empire will be shaken to its core around the world. So the U.S. is in a fight for its life, just as Russia's in a fight for its life. And therefore, Biden is pulling out all stops. He's got everything riding on victory, and he is determined to prevail on the battlefield, and in the process to overthrow Putin, to essentially cripple Russia, and then, as Liz Truss just pointed out in London, to establish a kind of a worldwide, global NATO that will humble China as well. So those are the U.S. goals.
Well, I mean, if that is the case, which all fingers are pointing to that direction, Arnold August, when was the last time the U.S. actually did win a war? Did it win in Syria? Did it win in Afghanistan? I mean, when was the last time that it did?
Well, the last time was the Second World War, but it was the Soviet Union, ironically, that won it for the United States. Since then, they've lost everything. They lost all the wars, and the situation in Ukraine, their goal now is to weaken Russia, right? As part of the overall attempt to establish a domination against the growing Russia-Chinese alliance. But that goal is not just like since February 24. That goal started several years ago when NATO, under the direction and the leadership of the United States and their close allies such as Canada, provoked Russia, went up to Russia's border. Even the Pope had to admit that yesterday, half-heartedly, that perhaps it was NATO that provoked Russia. So that the goal that they're seeking now, domination, actually was the same goal that provoked NATO's aggressiveness against Russia starting in starting in the coup, the Maidan coup in 2014. So it's a continuation of the same goal, United States. But now, what is different now compared to before 2014 is that the multipolar world is stronger. Like, United States can kid themselves by saying, "Oh, we, the international community." But what is the international community that is supporting their action against Russia? It's basically the Europe and North America. If you look at all of the global South, the vast majority, almost all of the countries, either do not refuse to denounce a Russian invasion, or are also against the U.S. policy of sanctions against Russia. So they can kid themselves, but the international community is just themselves. And I think by getting Israel more fully and openly involved in Ukraine, how will that go down with even the Arab countries such as Saudi Arabia and other countries all over the South, the global South, who have no interest, no favorable feeling with regards to Israel? It'll backfire against them, and they'll even lose more friends in the world, aside, of course, from the European and North American core.
So, Daniel Lazare, correct me if I'm wrong. If we're sitting looking at Russia and the officials there, in particular Putin, obviously, and the head of the military, and they're getting squeezed left, right, and center, and with the fact now that you have Israel reported to have fighters there on the ground, also the fact that you're having the U.S., which I'm sure, if you agree, has special operatives on the ground in Ukraine. Recent reports saying that it's training people in Germany, Ukrainians in Germany. We're looking at Russia that's a nuclear-powered nation that has more nuclear bombs than the U.S. Isn't that, I don't want to say playing with the lion's tail, but is that getting too dangerous here?
It's playing with fire. Nuclear fire. It's extraordinarily dangerous. Yes, but as I said before, the U.S.'s military record, as you point out, is extremely poor. The U.S. has lost every major war it's been involved in since World War II, and in that case, it was the Soviets who really won the war, not the Americans. But this is a war America has to win. If it loses, then not only America loses, but the American empire loses.
What would a win look like, though, for America? What would it look like?
Well, America wants to see, at the very least, see Russia expelled from all of the Ukraine, and probably the Crimea and the Donbass republics as well. It wants to see Russia make restitution. It wants to see Putin overthrown. It wants to see Russia itself shrunk and crippled. And it wants to see China get down on its knees and apologize and to promise to be a good boy forevermore. But certainly the U.S. wants the invasion rolled back. And if it doesn't succeed in that, then the U.S. empire is in big trouble. So we are really facing an epic moment in global history, where this amazing empire, which by the 1990s had virtually conquered the globe, is now facing a crucial test. A test it must and it must prevail. If it doesn't prevail, then the whole U.S. global order is going to be in big trouble.
Well, as our guest there, Daniel Lazare, mentioned, Arnold August, and I heard him mention China on a number of occasions. That's the next stop for the U.S. I mean, you know, if we're looking at what's happening in Ukraine, that could be a walk in the park compared to what we're going to see in China if the U.S. is going to pursue the same avenue. Or does that depend on the ticker on the stock market and to see how much money they've made, and maybe they say, okay, we've made enough money, so China is not going to be as severe. I mean, are we looking at U.S. really using the same approach towards China?
Well, I would go a bit farther and say that what the United States is doing in Russia, and let us make no mistake about it, their main goal in Russia is regime change in Moscow, to try to have a government there that is in favor or ready to ally with the United States. Now, not only China is the next step, but in my view, the American provocation, NATO provocation against Russia on its borders since 2014 is part of their overall goal, which the main principal goal is opposing China. They want to see China weaken. They want to desperately try and keep China from increasing its economic influence, increasing even its moral influence, its example. Because after all, you know, of course, Russia is not a socialist country, we agree, okay? But China is, and it's quite well known amongst the world population, increasingly, especially in third world countries, that Russia has developed so much in terms of, for example, bringing millions of people, hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. Education is free there. Health is free there. They have advanced so much. And United States, that is what is threatening the United States. And I think it goes all the way back to Obama when he started that policy of the pivot against China. At least Obama foresaw that. He knew that China was coming. It was increasing its influence, economic, political, and moral influence in the world. And the United States should concentrate on China, and the conflict now in Russia against Russia is part of the overall main goal of American pivot against China.
All right, and finally, Daniel Lazare, we're looking at the UK that's rationing cooking oil. We're looking at the IMF that's sent out a warning saying in Africa there's going to be civil unrest, social disorder because of what's happening with the food situation. We're looking at energy shortages around the world. The U.S. itself has recorded a 1 2/10% contraction, which many are saying signals a recession. And I can keep this going for another half hour probably, but we don't have the time. Is it worth it?
Is it worth it? Well, I mean, first of all, the U.S. provoked this war, number one, which is extremely foolish from an imperial point of view. But the U.S. Just can't tolerate. It can't tolerate the Russian presence.
Right.
It can't tolerate having a rival, you know, that challenges its global power.
Very well.
Therefore, the U.S. feels it is worth it, and is determined to pursue this war to the bitter end.
Thank you, Daniel. Sorry to jump in. Journalist and author Arnold August, thank you so much. Author and journalist from Montreal. And with that, we come to an end for this edition of The Spotlight. From Ikavitakwa, it's goodbye.